Alright, let's look at exercise 65, the toy hammer. This is one of the more complicated exercises that we've done so far. And it even states here in the directions that some models require more attention to detail. This is an example of a model that requires precise modeling techniques. I will say that I'm not necessarily going to ask that you use the precision dimensions that they show here. I think there's some techniques that we can use to make sure that our model turns out well of this toy hammer without necessarily going to the extent of some of the dimensions that they show here. Nonetheless, it is a challenging exercise and you need to pay careful attention to what you're doing. There's a number of requirements that pieces and parts, curves, etc. be symmetrical. So we're going to use the mirror command quite a bit in this. So pay attention to that, do the best you can, and we'll see what we come up with. We are on page 199 of the manual for exercise 65, so if you're not there, you might want to open that up as well. So let's go ahead and take a look in Rhino, and the first thing that it has us do is to open up the hammer model. So I'm going to go ahead and open the hammer model under the level 1 training folder. And notice they do have some notes here for us. They've included some layers. There's a variety of layers here. Now, one of the first things that students always look at on page 200 is it shows some construction lines, and the first thing they say is, well, I have no construction lines. But you got to take a look at the layers, because if you look down here, you'll notice that the construction line layer is not turned on. So if I turn it on, there are the lines that they're showing there on page 200 of your manual. So to begin with, I'm going to start by working on that claw, and there's a couple circles that we're going to draw. They give us some specific directions to draw those circles. So the first thing is to use curve, circle, and the tangent to 3 curves option here. So tangent to curves, and pick the 3 lines that exist here around that area to draw that first circle. The second circle, we're going to use tangent, tangent, radius, and we're going to pick the top line, the line on the right, and a radius of 4. Next, we're going to use arc. We're going to use the arc command, and in order to do this, I'm going to again use a tangent, tangent, radius option. So curve, arc, tangent, tangent, radius, and I'll pick on the upper edge of the larger circle and then the upper edge of the smaller circle, and the radius, looking back at the drawing for this, is 80. And then of course we need to pick the direction. Yep, see, it didn't do it right for me this time. So I'm going to escape out of this. I'll try it again. I think I need to make sure that I pick further on top of or to the left on the larger circle. I'll try this again. It's probably good that it did that to me so that you guys can see the same thing. Again, pick further out there. And I can see the curve starting to create there, so I'll pick there. And again, the radius is 80. That's better. And then pick one more time just to choose that arc. We'll repeat that same process to create the smaller radius here. This time the radius is 50. And again, pick on this side to create that. So there we have that outline, and now we're going to use the trim command onto page 201. Edit, trim. First thing it asks for are the cutting objects. The 2 cutting objects are those 2 arcs that we just made. We hit enter, And now we pick the insides of the circles to trim those out. Hit enter again to finish. We'll use the join command now, edit join, to pull all of these curves together as one. And just to verify that, you see that they all are selected at one time. Alright, I'm going to take this curve now and I'm going to give a thickness to it. So I'll use the solid extrude planar curve straight option. And let's take a look in my other views. I want to make sure I'm using both sides. Go ahead and make sure you're using both sides. And then I'm going to use one of my right or front view here just to see. I'll go up about 3 grid squares for thickness. Actually, that's a little thick. I might go 2 grid squares for the thickness of the claw. And so there you can see is that first part. Let's move on to page 202, and we're gonna try to create the head. By the way, I did I forgot to change the claw to the claw layer. I can do that by going to Edit, Layers, Change, Object Layer, and again this is going to go to the claw layer. Click OK. Alright, so let's change this color. We're ready to move on to page 202. I need to change, make sure I'm on the curves layer. So if you aren't on the curves layer, change back to the curves layer. And I'm going to go ahead and use this top view here and zoom in on this part right here. I'll use the curve freeform control points command. We're going to use this quite a bit. And I'm going to create half of the curve for the head of the hammer. I want to make sure I start inside of the existing surface that I have there. So start inside there and then begin to create your shape. Now you can see in the manual what they did, the points that they picked. Don't feel like you have to pick those exact points. The one thing you do want to do is you want to make sure that you hit the midpoint. So if your O snap for mid is not turned on, turn it on so that you get this to snap to that midpoint right there. And I'll click and then enter to finish that curve. So there's my curve, again ending right on the midpoint. Okay, this time I'm going to change to the head layer. And I'm going to use the revolve command. Surface, revolve. Now the axis is going to be right off of the midpoint, so allow your crosshair to snap to that midpoint. And then hold down the shift key to ortho, toggle ortho on and turn and come straight up. And the easiest thing to do is now at this point is to just click full circle. You want it to go around 360 degrees. So you can see it now over here in your perspective view. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to union these two parts together. So I'm going to go to Solid, Union, and select each part. Now there may be an issue here. Okay, and this is the issue that comes up. If you have that same issue, we're going to undo, Control Z, and we need to change the DIR, direction for the head. You may remember doing this on another exercise, the duck. So I'll change the DIR for the head. I'm going to come up here and choose Flip. And then hit Enter again to finish that. Now let's try our union one more time. Solid, Union. Select each part, hit Enter, And now they've all joined together as one part. So it worked. Okay, moving on to page 203. Again, another instance where we've got to be careful about making sure that this is symmetrical. I'm going to work in my right viewport this time. Okay, right viewport, and I'm going to use, once again, the curve freeform control points. Now when I do this, I want to try to use that grid that's showing up there to the best of our ability. And I'm gonna, before I do that, let me switch back to my curves layer. It's always good to use the curves layer for these construction lines. So again, curve, freeform, control points. And I'm going to start to create a curve for the cutout of the claw. And I want it to kind of bend down there and then hit enter. But make sure that you snap right onto that line, onto the axis. Because now I'll use my mirror command under transform, mirror, pick the endpoint, hold down the shift key. There you go, now you have a symmetrical part. I need one more line to close off the end of it. And then I'm going to join all three of these together. So edit, join, to pull all of those together. Okay, step 4 on page 203 asks for me to move this curve that I just drew closer to the claw. So I can use my shift key and start to pull this up here a little closer. Step 5 then asks to rotate that. So transform, rotate. The base point is the top end. The reference point is the bottom end. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of a rotation. And just try to line it up as best you can with the angle of the claw itself. Step 7 is to extrude this curve. So extrude, planar curve, straight. In this case, I don't need to use both sides, so I'm going to turn both sides off. And I'll extrude through the end of the claw. And again, I neglected to change layers, but that's okay. We're getting pretty good at changing these. We need to change that to the claw layer as well. So I will go to Edit, Layers, Change Object Layer to Claw, and click OK. So you can see they're different colors. Now I'm going to use the Boolean difference to remove that shape for the claw itself. So I'll select the head, go to Solid, Difference, and choose now the shape for the claw. And there we go. I've got a claw shape now on the end of my hammerhead. It asked me to use the fillet edge to round off the tops and bottom of the claw. So I will go to Solid, Fillet Edge. The radius we want to use is 2, so I'll click Current Radius, change that to 2, and select the top edge and the bottom edge. Hit Enter, and that should finish that off. There was one other fillet that we want to use, and that's this part where the head meets the rest of the body of the head that it asked us to do earlier. So let's go ahead and do that now as well. We'll leave it to a current radius of 2. Pick that point right there. Enter a couple times, and that finishes that fillet off as well. Okay, moving on to page 204. we're going to begin to work on the tang, which is this area down here of the hammer. And I want to work in the right viewport as much as I can, although I'm going to use my perspective view as well. It also asks me to turn ortho on. So I'll come down here and turn ortho on. And I'm going to start by using my freeform curve again. Control points. The start point is right here at this intersection. And I'm going to pick it in the perspective view. And then I'm going to move down to my right view. So I want to pick a point here halfway up this grid square, and then in the corner of the grid square here, and then I want to try to end again on the intersection of that grid point right there. So I do that because I need to make sure that this is symmetrical. So I'll pick that line that I just created. Again, I'll use mirror. Pick the endpoint, hold down the shift key, and now I'll join these two together. Use my shift key to pick both at the same time, edit, and join. Now I'm going to use mirror again, step 3 on page 204, to mirror this down. Pick one end, pick the other end, and then once again join both of these together. So there's my curve for this tang. By the way, it does ask us on a number of occasions throughout this to save your model. So if you haven't saved this yet, now would be a good time to save. Go ahead and pause and save your model to make sure you don't lose any of your work. Okay, coming back to page 205 now. We're going to begin to create the rest of the tang. I'm going to use my top viewport. Once again, curve, freeform, control points. I'll start right down here at the intersection of my construction lines. Now in this case I need to turn the ortho off so that I can give a slight inward bend to this tang curve. I want to make sure that I pass through this point here and then on in to the claw head and hit enter to finish that. So there's my tang curve, and once again I'm going to use mirror, transform, mirror, and if you can, see if you can find the midpoint over here on that line. You want to mirror about this axis from the midpoint right here, and then I'm going to come back over to the top view and use my shift key to get me orthographic here again. So once again, being symmetrical is important. Alright, I want to change to the tang layer now. Double click on that tang layer, and I'm going to use a new command. I don't believe we've used this yet before. I'm going to go to surface, sweep to rails. It's going to create a pretty interesting shape for us. So the first rail is one of these curves that I just created. The second rail is the other curve, and then the cross-section curve is this curve on the end. Go ahead and hit enter, and then hit enter again, and then just click OK. We're not going to change anything on these options. So there's the part. can see it kind of merging into the head. And now we're going to go ahead and do the union of these two parts. And just because we've done this before and we kind of know, I'm going to use that DIR, the direction, and choose that tang that we just created. And I want to flip. So I want those arrows to point outward. I'll hit enter. And now I'm ready to use the union to pick both of these and make them all one. So now this is all one part. Again, they want me to use the fillet edge. And I'm going to pick that intersection right there of the tang and the head. Enter a couple times. Gives me a little bit of a rounded surface there between. Okay, moving on to page 206. Let's work on the handle. I'm going to work in the top view. And I want to begin by using my, once again, freeform control points curve. I'm going to start right at the end point here. And before I do that, let me escape out of that. One thing I neglected to do is to go back to my curves layer. Let's try that again. Curve, freeform, control points. Again, choose that intersection. And I'm going to begin to create that curve. Along here, and it starts to bend in just a little bit at the end of it. It looks like it's bending out a little too far. I'm going to Control Z back a couple points just to make sure it doesn't extend beyond that construction line. And then once again, finish right on the axis for this part here. So there's my curve for the handle so far. And as I've done before, I want to mirror that. Transform mirror. Pick the end point, hold down the shift key. So I have two parts now. And then once again, I'm going to use that surface, sweep two rails. First rail, second rail, and the cross section is once again that same curve that we used down here. And if it gives you that option, make sure you choose the curve there. I'll hit enter. Nothing to adjust. Enter. We don't need to change the options. We'll click OK. And of course that part needs to be on the handle layer, so I'll go ahead and go to Edit, Layers, Change Object Layer, and change to the handle layer. Now step 6 on page 206 is important. It's not something that you're necessarily going to see, but in order to do the next part, which is putting the hole through the handle, you need to make sure that this is a solid piece. So in order to do that, I'm going to select the handle, and I'm going to go to Solid and Cap Planar Holes. Cap Planar Holes, because that inside area inside of here where the handle meets the tang, remember our profile started up here at the intersection. So we actually had a hole in there. Even though we couldn't see it, it was there. And if we didn't cap that, then our hole would not work when we tried to difference it. So make sure you do that. Alright, moving on to the last page for this part is page 207. And it wants me to work, I'm going to work in the top view here. It gives me a center line here to start with, a construction line. I'll go to my circle command, and choose that point. If you want to look back at the dimensions, you're welcome to do that. The dimensions for that hole has a diameter of 12, which would be a radius of 6. I'll go ahead and enter that to stay consistent with it. And next I'm going to use my extrude planar curve, straight. This time I want to use both sides. I want it to project up and down. Doesn't necessarily matter how far up, just as long as it's outside of the handle. I'll click there. And now I'm going to use my difference command. I'll select the handle first, solid difference, choose that cylinder, and I have a hole through there. The last part then is to use your solid fillet edge once again. Pick the top part of the circle, pick the bottom part of the circle, enter a couple times, and it rounds that hole off. So there's your toy hammer. Before you finish this, I'd like you, of course, to apply a couple materials to the handle and the head. Add a ground plane. You'll of course need to move the whole thing up so that it's sitting above the red axis. Add a ground plane. And this is probably another one where we can use the car paint white. The white always seems to show things fairly well. And the background color will be white once again. I'll pick a couple materials real quick. Blue plastic handle. A red plastic head. And a spotlight to make sure everything shows up. And then let's see what this looks like rendered. There we go. So again, save that as a JPEG and submit to Core Sites. And this concludes our exercise for the toy hammer, exercise 65.